Shanghai GDG is a very interesting developer community.
I'm glad somebody has asked this question.
This is where the magic happens.
This is primarily a question and answer show. So if any of you out there would like to ask questions.
Hi there, I'm Jan from the AppScript Developer Relations team, and this is Developer Chat, the first one that we've been doing of this. We have Andrew Stillman with us today. I'd like to introduce him a little bit, and thanks for joining us. So Andrew provides instructional design, technology support, project management, planning services, execution support, all sorts of other things for implementing blended learning strategies across multiple schools as part of his job at New Visions for Public Schools in New York City. He works across multiple schools there, and one of his primary accomplishments at New Visions has been the conception, creation, and growth of UPD, which is an ecosystem for teachers to share creative solutions to problems that they face, and to build things called hacks, which I think are basically the solutions to those problems. So they can share solutions and promote things through challenges, and participate and present at professional meetups across the city. So he also works on developing scripts that can be used for educators who are Google Apps for EDU customers as well. And that's as part of his work with New Vision's Cloud Lab. So Andrew, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
We're really excited to do this. I also want to mention my favorite part. Andrew is also one of the probably most prolific developers, publishers in the AppScript script gallery. You've written many of our most popular scripts that are in the gallery, things like Autocrat, Doctopus, which is my favorite name, and Form Mule, which are really useful scripts that we're seeing a lot of uptake with. So I wanted to start by asking you how you got involved with AppScript. So what prompted you to start using it?
Really, I credit the most of this work, in fact, most of the inspiration for this work to one of our most high-achieving principals, a man by the name of Mark Dinetz, who is at a school called the Academy for Careers in Television and Film. But he and his planning team started the school 4 years ago, and they came at the whole planning process through the use of Google products, and just found that the collaboration environment they were in ended up being sort of one layer after the next, the best way to solve a lot of their planning and systems problems in the school. And so kind of like layers of an onion, they just kept building shared spreadsheets and forms and various systems around everything from like purchasing to tracking student behavior issues to like keeping a live copy of their online gradebook and mashing it all up and integrating it, and basically creating their own custom dashboards and workflows. And so he was using AppScript in kind of a rudimentary way, just to run basic document and email merges off of triggers, usually form triggers. And I came along and he kind of pushed my organization to say, like, look, more schools should be doing this. Like, we're getting results here. And his school has gotten insanely good results. Like, they just graduated their first cohort, and they're at a 97% four-year graduation rate, which is 30 plus points higher than the city average. And they're a non-selective New York City public high school, which means their student population is very much like the rest of the cities, and so it's just sort of an off-the-charts achievement. And so Mark pushed us to support the work, which meant that I had to spend some late nights learning. And initially, we had subcontracted someone to do some scripting for us, and I don't have a coding background, or not a particularly strong one. And so initially I was hesitant, and I just assumed we needed to find a professional developer to do the work. And gradually I started hacking away, and I had a run-in with some folks on the docs engineering team, and they were like, dude, you can learn this, do it. You know?
That's great.
And so I started writing scripts, and it sort of blew my mind how quickly I could be up and running with things, and just how fast the development cycle was, particularly with the code editor. It was the first time I'd had a code editor that was saving all my revisions, letting me debug in a very clear cut way. And so it just sort of transformed my own learning process. And so suddenly I was producing like the first really robust document merge utility for Google Docs, and I had fan mail, and it was just like, sort of an unexpected journey.
Right.
That just came about through a demanding and successful principal who pushed me to figure out how to make these things better. So a lot of my challenge has been ultimately, like, New Vision supports 76 New York City public high schools. So if we're going to take these sort of esoteric script-based workflows that exist in one school and move them into other schools, we have to think about how to make them as user-friendly as possible.
Right.
And so my first step was to really learn UI app and like figure out how to put everything in a menu. So if something needed to be configured or a document needed to be connected to the script or whatever, like there was no hard-coded dependencies. And so I quickly got into trying to engineer app script solutions that would be accessible to non-technical users.
Right.
And that was kind of the motivation for the design of most of the scripts I've developed.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that always strikes me when I try your scripts. I find that they are easy to set up and use. You don't expect your users to be going into the code editor and changing values and setting it up that way. You have these nice menu-driven, almost like a wizard-driven setup flows, which are I think make life a lot easier for your users, even though it's probably more work for you as the developer to put that system into place. I think it's pretty helpful.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just not going to get adoption at least not by the people that I want adopting the scripts, unless I put it in a drop-down menu or a widget. So yeah, I mean, and initially I was using script properties mostly. We've started using ScriptDB a bit more for storing. But just figuring out how to store values and have persistent memory. We're also now using user properties a fair amount. Because we're interested in actually having analytics on usage by school. So so those have been really important things to learn.
Great.
But yeah.
Cool. So can you tell us a little bit about some of these scripts that you've created?
Sure. Yeah. And maybe a screen share at this point would make sense. I want to show some of these sort of what I would call modular building blocks. We've tried to think about. I love Legos, and I feel like most good software is like Legos. So, just the idea that we have these flexible kind of core building blocks, that two of which are merge utilities. So, anytime you see this mule icon, which I'll cut away to a version. Oh, wrong one. That's the autocorrect. So this mule, which kicks and neighs and whatnot, is just an animated GIF. But this is the form mule, and this script is responsible for taking form data on a trigger or spreadsheet data and generating merged emails. And there's a bunch of email merge utilities already in the script gallery, but this one in particular has the UI to configure it in lots of different ways, and it currently can send up to 3 templated emails. The templates are totally configurable. They can be sent on conditions, and so ultimately this becomes a really important staple. The other thing this does is it'll create a merged calendar event on a calendar ID of your choosing. So if you want to have a combination of an email sent and an event created, it can let you do that. The last thing this script does that ends up being really important is that it lets you select columns in which, when the form data comes in, a formula can be copied down from row to row automatically.
Oh, that's nice.
And what's powerful about that is that it means that your forms can have validated drop-downs of items that then get looked up in another sheet. And that little stitch ends up making any form, Google form, into something that behaves much more like the front end of a relational database. So things like student name, teacher name, class period, anything that is a validated piece of information that might have things looked up on.
I see.
So like student email, teacher email, start time of period, end time of period. Those kinds of things can be referenced in secondary sheets that are running in the same spreadsheet as the form. And so what Formule does is it allows you to copy those values down from row to row every time a form trigger runs. And it means then that your merged emails suddenly take on a whole new power, right? Because you can email particular people based on incident type, or you can only trigger a calendar event when a particular drop-down is chosen in the form, right? It just sort of radically changes the power of what a Google form can do. So that's one of the scripts. And the other kind of big merge script is a document merge utility called Autocrat. And the reason it's called the Autocrat is so you don't have to be the bureaucrat.
Nice.
But that is Stalin's mustache that's twitching around on the Autocrat. And those little tags that you see on his chest are the notation that we use for the merge tags in a document template. So this is a Google document merge utility. It basically produces either a PDF or a Google Doc. It merges in rows of data. It merges into the header, the footer, the body. It preserves formatting. It's fairly robust, and the field mapping is all accomplished through a UI. So when I'm storing field mappings in a JSON string, and then those settings are persistent, and it works.
That's great.
It brings in sharing, so you can, in the process of merging a document, also merge in collaborators. So it ends up again being and also organize the document in a folder of your choosing. So it means that schools can now do things like have a mastered lesson plan generator where lesson plans are deposited in a lesson library for the school.
That's nice.
Pre-shared with the teacher, and yada yada yada. So this is the second big building block, and I'm just going to cut away to this workflow. This is an example system. This is one of the more sophisticated systems that schools I work with are playing with. And again, these are designed as part of an initiative called the Cloud Lab, which was something we just launched this summer. But it's essentially engaging schools as design partners in systems rethinking. And I think for the first time in the history of software, we actually have enough flexibility and usability in the basic systems building blocks that school level people can actually make these things.
That's interesting. So the people that are working with these building blocks that you've put together are not programmers. They're teachers who just have an interest in making their lives a little less complicated.
They're power users at the school level, right? Yeah. So they're going to the script gallery, saying I've got a Google form that I want to have generate a document. Like the secretaries need to have a way to generate a lateness letter, blah blah blah, right?
Okay.
Like there's 1,000,001 kinds of different systems in schools that there are no centrally provided systems for, and a lot of the centrally provided systems, especially in New York, are antiquated. So many schools operate with tremendous inefficiencies, and as soon as they start to see what these building blocks can do, it like opens up 50,000 different things that they suddenly are like, why are we using a triplicate form with carbon copy? They just start cobbling these things together. But so this is a workflow that shows the logic for what's called a conduct intervention communication log, which is sort of like a catch-all form for logging everything from school home attendance outreach calls to behavior incidents to parent-teacher conferences to whatever. So it's like an anecdotal capture point. And then it has all these email triggers. So we have all these conditionals built that have to do with, do you want to notify the kid's advisor, right? And an advisor is usually, in most small New York City schools, the point person for most kind of social emotional issues for kids. So keeping that person in the loop is really important. This radically changes the way you can do that, right?
So I have a question for you about this. So prior to having a script-based solution like this, the script and docs and all of this workflow, how was this process being managed? Or was it being managed?
Prior to scripts?
Yeah, so for example, what was happening before?
It was a mess. I mean, oftentimes it just wasn't happening. Like you have if I have a behavior incident with a child in one of my classes and I want the advisor to know about it, it would mean often physically finding that person
Okay.
in the midst of a busy school day, or sending them an individual email, which then gets lost in an inbox somewhere, and it doesn't have a clear accounting attached to it. So there is no centralized way for anyone to look at a single student and understand a history of interactions and a history of home contacts that might have happened. So it'd be like calling your credit card company and having them not know anything about you, right?
Right.
Whereas most other industries, you have a persistence and a kind of coherence of like, just information management.
Right, yes, understood.
And this kind of stuff just doesn't exist in public schools for the most part.
Okay.
So this really changes the underlying fabric of how a lot of these schools are able to work.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Cool. So, and this one seems to use not just Autocrat and Formule, but another one as well.
Yes, the push data.
With my favorite,
your favorite
my
icon.
favorite icon.
So we need to show off that icon for a second. Push data uses a hamster because one of my favorite things about AppScript is it works almost at the speed of a human being. Like it literally looks like a screen macro running when you see it. And so this script in particular, it does essentially the job of import range. Import range is a function that's unique to Google Spreadsheets that lets you bring a specified range of data into another spreadsheet just using its spreadsheet key. But it's limited in terms of the number of rows of data it can handle. And it can really slow down your spreadsheets if you're working with larger than like 2,000 rows of data or something. So push data is a replacement for that that pushes on a time trigger, and it lets you choose a source and a destination sheet, and it becomes like a console for mapping all the relationships between spreadsheets in a root folder. So if you have a folder for a system that has, let's say, 10 or 15 different spreadsheets involved, I could maintain, for example, a master student list in one location, and then I could have certain columns of that pushed out to as many other locations as I want on a regular time trigger. So it then allows you to do things like VLOOKUPs on student name in 50 different forms, right? You could have as many different systems as you want that are all keyed on the same up-to-date synchronized master list, right? And so it in some ways is a substitute for having a true relational database. School level people are not going to be able to set up a relational database. Like they need a flexible spreadsheet environment.
Something where they don't have to worry about hosting and
exactly
all of that.
Right. So this is kind of an underlying piece of infrastructure for that. So like in this system here, push data is syncing the master student list and the master teacher list with all these two other spreadsheets, one of which is the back end to the actual form, and then the other which is an attendance tracker, which basically is, in this case, allowing the school to easily see on a one-to-one basis whether a phone call home was made by the advisors for any given absence. So it lets you really maintain a lot of transparency around what kind of outreach is happening around attendance. So anyway, that's really just, what is that, 3 scripts that do all this.
That's fantastic. So do you find that there have been any particular challenges in getting teachers or schools to adopt these types of workflows, or do you find that once they see one working, they kind of get the value right away? What are some of the challenges, I guess, that... Yeah,
some of the challenges have been, initially when we were using these scripts, and you make a copy of a Google spreadsheet that has a script in it, and the script comes with it, and that's great. But these scripts are all dependent on script properties being set.
Right.
And the configuration of these scripts is not obvious to, even though it's run through a UI, you have to figure out what it's even asking you. Like, what is a field mapping, right? Like, your average school employee, there's a learning curve. So we've done, one of the things we had to overcome was the fact that script properties don't copy with scripts.
Right.
And so we are, I developed a way to get the script properties to output as a code string, essentially, that could then be pasted back into a function that would run on install.
Oh, interesting.
So
okay.
these are self-configuring scripts. So once someone takes the 3 or 4 hours to build one of these systems, it can then be packaged in such a way that the next person who comes along and has to set up that system as a copy doesn't have to do any of the configuration steps in the scripts. The scripts are pre-configured. So that was a really important implementation shift that we had to make. The other has been in preserving relationships between spreadsheets. Like many of these systems require multiple spreadsheets, so you've got to have push data sending things across spreadsheets, and any dependency on document ID was creating a huge problem because you could go to set up the new system and everything would be pointing to the old system.
Right, I see what you're saying.
So we had to, in creating push data, what I did was I made it refresh all of the document IDs on install using file name. So I was referencing the root folder that it was sitting in, quickly going through all the files and pulling in their document IDs so that every single mapping that exists in push data is valid in the new copy.
Okay.
So those kinds of things ended up being really important. And then lastly, just making the distribution of these things really super easy. Like if you ask someone to download 6 different spreadsheets and put them in a folder, you've already lost them. So we built recently something called the Cloud Lab Systems Replicator. It's kind of an intimidating name. I should probably change it, but essentially this is a private login only web app, which I recently learned how to make, and it's essentially accessing a subset of folders in my docs list, and these are folders that each contain a fully packaged system, including documentation. So I can go, for example, into after-school credit recovery and attendance system, which is the system we were just looking at. And oh no, this is a different system. And you can see underneath the documentation is previewed, so you can make a decision about whether this system is for you. We try to include systems diagrams because we find these are really helpful for less technical users to understand. And installation instructions. So making all of this stuff abundantly clear. And then the other thing we did is this is a single function that copies an entire folder's contents to your drive. So there's no folder copy native to docs as far as I know. So when I click this, it literally will generate the folder, and you can see, I'll blow this up for the sake of our users. You'll see the system being replicated.
Oh, nice. Okay.
Right into the person's drive. So this is another way that we have kind of lowered the barrier for adoption for schools.
Reducing the chances of user error, forgetting to copy one of the important pieces of the puzzle and things like that.
It also means that any school is now potentially a publisher of a system, right? So that it like completely shifts the innovation. We'll call it an ecosystem, right? You no longer are dependent necessarily on a software developer to do the kind of the systems thinking side of it. You have Lego building blocks, and then you have people on the ground working with the kids who understand the problems deeply and who can then design the system the way it needs to be.
And then share it.
Right, and there's no delay. There's no 6 months of waiting for the issue queue to be updated, or for the big student information company to decide that this is a priority, right? And the school has it tomorrow.
That's exciting.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
Awesome. So we have a few minutes left, and one more question for you, but first I just want to see if there's anything on our moderator page. Let's see, this morning we didn't have anything specifically about this session. It looks like we still don't. There is a support-related question there that we'll answer separately. So my last question for you was, what would you like to see from AppScript in the future? What are some things, oh, I see your eyes twinkling, that would make your life easier in developing these types of solutions? And specifically, since you specifically seem to work mostly with educators, like what in that area would make your development life easier?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, at this point, there's much more for me still to learn about AppScript than I have than I've had time to learn. I mean, I'm not just a developer, so I spend a lot of my time in schools, and I still want to learn ScriptDB inside and out.
Right.
I've had the pleasure of working with some Google Summer of Code interns this summer.
Right.
My understanding is that there's still some reliability issues with ScriptDB. Not major, but in particular when dealing with large batches of data.
Okay.
So there's and I think there's already an issue in the tracker on this, but it sort of severely hampers the way it works when you can't write large numbers of rows. A lot of what I want to be able to do is allow the user to maintain their data set in a spreadsheet, but have a secondary warehouse where that data is stored for longevity, because
Interesting. Okay.
there are limits to the number of rows in a spreadsheet.
Right.
In particular, when you start adding formulas, and the performance of spreadsheets degrades so that they become almost unusable beyond, like, I don't know, 6,000 or 7,000 rows. If you have things like VLOOKUP running,
Very
like it's just
complicated,
impossible.
yeah.
So I would really like to make sure that ScriptDB can do things like that, and I almost feel like there needs to be a clearer library where you can just literally just send a spreadsheet range into ScriptDB and like pull it back.
I like that
Like,
idea.
so
Yeah, that's a nice thing.
without having to think too much. And I'm sure there's already a library written to do that, and I just don't know about it. But I guess the other thing I would love to see is just a ready-made HTML editor UI element, because a lot of what I'm having folks do is develop things like an email merge template or a document merge template or whatever, and particularly in the email side of things, it would be really cool if people could author HTML. And I know this is now possible through, I think it's through HTML service.
It's it should technically be possible. Yes.
Right. So I would love to see proof of concept
So
on
like
that.
a rich text editor that you could
Rich text editor
widget that you could just stick in there.
Because right now I have folks editing email templates in a spreadsheet cell.
Right.
Which is really tricky for folks who, they like, even figuring out how to get a hard return in a spreadsheet cell is not self-evident.
Right.
And then because I want to allow HTML, I'm having to have them create break tags, and I don't want my end users to have to code in HTML to produce their templates. So that's a big one.
Okay.
I mean, I think lastly, we depend so much on Google Forms.
Yes.
And often the response I get when I say, Google Forms need to have things like range-dependent dropdowns, like hugely important for us, because we're dealing with ever-changing student registers. We want to be able to validate form data when it comes in, and so we can't just have open text fields. And to be able to preserve a 3,000 student list in such a way that it's always exactly a match with our current student register in a school requires all kinds of ludicrous workarounds.
Right, I can imagine. So more powerful forms and then better integration.
Yeah, I think the forms product itself, but then to be able to modify Google Forms through an API would be phenomenal. And I mean that and additional form widgets like date, be able to validate something like an email. So yeah, I mean, forms are huge for us.
Right. Every time I've talked to somebody who's even remotely in the education world, they always mention forms and wishing forms could do X, Y, or Z. So we definitely hear the. Yeah,
I mean, I was showing someone a Google form the other day, and they're like, "Oh, so this could like replace Microsoft Access." And I was like, "Yes, it can, but there's a number of workarounds you have to develop still, and so getting rid of those would be awesome."
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. We'll definitely pass that feedback along to the team. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, and I just really appreciate you spending your time here with us, and also everything that you do for the AppScript community and for all these teachers out there. So
Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure.
all right.
All right.